It's been exactly a week today since Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made those dramatic allegations about possible Indian involvement in the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian national and a known Khalistani sympathizer and terrorist. Now, the interesting thing is, in this last 1 week, since Mr. Trudeau made those allegations, there has been no evidence that's been put in the public domain to substantiate those allegations. In fact, Government of India officials have been saying that neither before Mr. Trudeau went public nor after has even the Government of India been provided by the Government of Canada with credible evidence to back Mr. Trudeau's claims. Also separately, over the weekend, we had the story about how the initial intel for Hardeep Nijjar and his death was provided to Canada by the United States as part of its Five Eyes alliance. How, if at all, does that change what's been going on between India and Canada? Is there now a much larger diplomatic attention at play? And how should India respond? And the most important question being, short of the Canadians being able to provide intelligence and credible evidence to back these claims, should India consider ratcheting up the diplomatic pressure one notch higher?
Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the Government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter.
The issue of safe havens and places to operate is being provided abroad, including in Canada. We would expect that that is the main focus. The question is, do we have the political will to address terrorism, or we want to justify it and condone it?
I believe it's a very baseless information. India had never been involved in such activities. India has always condemned Pakistan-backed militancy. India is the one country which is victim of militancy. And India has been calling international community to define the definition of a terrorist.
मैं कनाडा सरकार से कहना चाहूंगा कि कुछ मुट्ठी भर जो लोग माहौल बिगाड़ने का काम कर रहे हैं, उन पर जल्दी से अंकुश लगाए, उन पर कार्रवाई करे। भारत जो है सदैव शांति में विश्वास करता है, सद्भावना में विश्वास करता है। भारत पूरी दुनिया को एक परिवार के रूप में मानता है।
Joining us now on the big talking point tonight on Brass Tacks. It's been exactly a week since Justin Trudeau made these rather dramatic allegations, but so far no evidence has been placed in the public domain. Terry Miliuski is the author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project. Professor Walter Ladwig is a senior lecturer of international affairs at the King's College in London. Professor Bharat Karnad, foreign affairs expert here in Delhi. Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, joining us, and Manjinder Singh Sirsa is national secretary with the BJP. Terry Miliuski, let me start with you. Exactly last Monday, Mr. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, rose in Parliament and made those dramatic allegations. Over the last 1 week, we are yet to hear what is it that he has in terms of credible evidence or proof to back these allegations. Why is it that Canada has not placed any of this material in the public domain? And the word that we're getting in from the Government of India, from the Prime Minister's office, from the National Security Advisor's office, from the Foreign Ministry, is that so far, either after his comments or before, there is nothing by way of evidence that's been shared with the Indian side.
I wish I had an explanation, but I'm afraid to say that I do not. The Canadian side is still reluctant to share the evidence that it has. All I can say to you is that I'm pretty sure that the Canadians will not be saying they had shared the details at the official level for weeks before the G20 summit in New Delhi. The Canadians say that they did indeed give specific information, including telephone numbers of the wiretaps that they allegedly received. Now, the Indians may reject this evidence. They may say it's not credible. Trudeau, of course, says it is. But what we have not heard yet is from Prime Minister Modi to say, okay, Trudeau's not telling you what the evidence is because it's nonsense. But I know what it is. It's inconceivable that he would have rejected the Canadian claims unless he knew what they were. So why couldn't he just step up and say, okay, he won't talk because this is nonsense, but I know what he's talking about, and here's why it's nonsense. That would end the matter. I mean, that would be game over, victory for Prime Minister Modi if he were to do that, but for some reason he's chosen not to. I just find that curious.
No,
but
that's probably because by going public, I think Justin Trudeau has, in a sense, thrown the ball at the court of the Indian side, but it is he who chose to go public, and I guess the onus is on him to make public if he has any evidence.
I agree with you.
But let me ask Manjinder Singh Sirsa. Mr. Sirsa, the BJP so far has, yes, one diplomat was expelled, one diplomat from the Canadian mission here was expelled. The visas, I think that's where the real sort of worry seems to be, that India has halted visas for Canadians wishing to travel to India. Canada has so far not announced anything, but if they were to reduce their diplomatic staff, as has been asked by the Foreign Ministry spokesperson last week, then that will just be an excuse for Canada also to reduce the number of visas being given to Indians. As a representative from Punjab and a politician from Punjab, don't you worry that that could be a point of concern for lakhs and lakhs of Punjabis, many of whom aspire to go to Canada?
I'm sorry, is that directed
to
Mr. Sirsa? Mr. Sirsa,
yeah, thank you. Concern for us.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's a concern for us also. But at the same point, when they have expelled our diplomat from Canada, we also get short of manpower there. And secondly, Canada should come out with clean hands. See, it can't be both things going together. Do we understand there is a big challenge for Punjabis, especially for students who have paid lakhs rupees as a fees and waiting for the visa? They need their applications to be processed as early as possible. So these are the very big challenges which we are facing day by day. But at the same time, the biggest challenge here is the way Canada has put up its point without any evidence and tried not to defame just India but also Punjabis across the world. We have been branded as a terrorist across the world by their one statement. So this is the biggest concern for us also, and I think Canada should come out with a clean hands and should feel that the statement given by them has went wrong. And today also you see what happened yesterday also what happened in Canadian Parliament. Again there was a goof, because Trudeau is hell-bent upon to get raise some kind of his negativity away, but he's getting more negativity by doing this kind of things. One day he blamed India, and today what he did, as entire Russia is talking about that, what they did, glorifying this kind of terrorism in a parliament itself, which shows that what is the sick mind of the Prime Minister of Canada. I'm sorry to say, but this shows what kind of mindset this Prime Minister has.
Rajiv Dogra, I think that's a fair point that Manjinder Singh Sirsa is making, because they had this absolutely embarrassing event where they brought in a Nazi veteran to the Canadian Parliament and were feting him, and people were applauding him, only to realize that who they thought he was not what he actually was. And, then again, there was this whole back and forth between the Prime Minister's office there and the Speaker's office. The Prime Minister's office saying it's the Speaker's office that was responsible for this guest. The Speaker's office apologizing. It goes to show that either they are not, being taken diplomatically seriously, or they have this rather laissez-faire that they can do whatever and get away with it and there won't be any consequences. Of course, there will be consequences, whether it is accusing India publicly or whether it is this, publicly felicitating and fitting a former Nazi veteran.
Saka, you are being diplomatic. Let me be blunt. I think last 1 week has shown incompetence at every level under Justin Trudeau's administration. His minister, who is responsible for granting citizenship, did not know when Nijjar was granted citizenship by him. First he said 2015, then someone must have told him that, look, we have to backdate it because there was an Interpol notice which was issued in 2014. So next day he says, cancel my last announcement, it was 2007. So similarly in this case, where they've got huge egg on their face, an entire country plus Poland is red hot angry against Trudeau, because this man has been living in Canada for dozens of years without any question being asked, and to top it all, he is being celebrated as a hero for having murdered thousands of Poles and thousands of Jews during the Second World War as a Nazi collaborator. So obviously there is something very wrong, and something very wrong does not go back to last Monday, but it antedates that, because Canadians are very angry with the way he has ignored Chinese misdoings in Canada. They interfered in 2 elections, I think in 2019 and then 2021, but Trudeau was far too scared of China to do anything about it. Just as he's been scared of Pakistan's ISI, who murdered a human rights activist called Miss Baloch in Canada. So he is very uncertain of himself, and now during the last 1 week he's got into a political swamp from which he doesn't know how to get out
Professor
of.
Ladwig,
but the major point really from India's point of view,
I think Ambassador Dogra has a point there, because in the last election, and you're aware of this, Trudeau made this whole business of Chinese interference in Canadian affairs a big talking point. In fact, many say that was a big sort of issue on which he campaigned, and an issue on which he managed to sort of rally not just his voters but also voters on the left of centre of Canadian politics. But since he came back to power in 2021, after that election, he's completely forgotten about Chinese interference. In fact, Canada also got into this whole prisoner swap arrangement with the daughter of the Huawei founder, Meng Wanzhou, who was released in return for 2 Canadian nationals. So basically going soft on China after the election and after he came back for a second term. And now, is he hoping to do the same thing with India as well by ratcheting up so publicly, accusing the Indian government and Indian government officials in the murder of a Canadian national on Canadian soil? Is he trying to make a China out of India as well, at least from domestic political considerations?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that Canada's relations with China are incredibly poor, and they have gotten worse and worse and worse over time. Yes, there was the prisoner swap deal after the Chinese took hostages, Canadian diplomats on sabbatical as hostages in an attempt to get the daughter of the Huawei founder back. I do think these prior episodes have made Canadians and Canadian officials more sensitive to the idea of other countries influencing their diasporic communities, and I'm certain that this case is seen through the possibly seen through the lens of China. I'd also say that we have multiple media reports that indicate it was actually the imminent release of information about this episode and investigation in Canadian news that forced the Prime Minister's hand. I don't know that he necessarily wanted to release it in the way he did, but my understanding is that this was about to be broken by several Canadian outlets, and therefore the issue came to a head. Not that this was a strategic calculation to reveal it when he did.
Okay, let me ask Bharat Karnad this. Again, we had over the weekend a New York Times report, as well as, of course, that prior to that, there was David Cohen, who's the US ambassador to Canada, who said it was one of the Five Eyes allies who initially provided the intel, and the New York Times identifying that ally as the United States, who first provided the intel to Canada. As Professor Ladwig was saying, do you think A, fear of the story leaking to the press, and B, the fact that the United States gave this to Canada first, sort of forced Trudeau's hand to go public? Because it doesn't fully explain why he decided to go so public in such a dramatic fashion, making such a dramatic allegation.
No, I think, look, Justin Trudeau is something of a dilettante. He is a light-headed dilettante who suffers from an entitlement syndrome. His father was Pierre Trudeau, who actually was the first Canadian Prime Minister to be very soft on the Sikh separatist movement. And that's been, that's the sort of legacy he has passed on to his son, who doesn't seem to have much of a political instinct of his own. The point, I think, is he's done this for political electoral reasons. The elections are coming up. It can be called any time before 2025, October 2025. And of course, he's on a losing kind of an end. That's what the pollsters say. That's what the opposition is really pushing him to the wall to get him to announce general elections. And that's the real point, where he needs the Sikh vote that can be marshaled by these Khalistanis who have captured these gurdwaras both on the western and the eastern seaboards of Canada, and who have been actually a thorn in the side of India. And the fact that the Canadian government has deliberately ignored and disregarded the evidence provided by the Indian government over the years, and they've been rather la-di-da about it, and now they find that what they thought would be was a punching bag has hit back at them. And now Justin Trudeau naturally doesn't know what to do about it.
So let me ask Manjinder Singh Sirsa, it's not just Canada. There are a bunch of at least a dozen plus Khalistani separatists and Khalistani terrorists who've been wanted for numerous crimes here in India, some of them in UK, some of them based in US, some of them based in Australia. There are lookout notices against some of them, there are Interpol Red Corner notices against some of them, and yet the government of India is not able to bring any of these people back.
No, there are two different things. One is that there is a lookout notice for someone who is not identified, or who do not, we just know that he is living in a particular country, but we are not aware of his complete details. But here is a different case. When it comes to Canada, there are kind of people who are living in Canada with a proper address and their details, and also claiming that they had killed innocent people in India. I'll give you evidence of one of this. Sidhu Moosewala, a very renowned singer, was killed in India just a months back. So who was his killer? His killer sitting there, Mr. Brad, he's there very much in Canada and giving interviews on national channels, coming out and saying, yes, we have killed him because we got this message that this has to be killed. We have killed him. So the person who is claiming on the soil of Canada that I have made somebody kill that person, he's enjoying the luxury there in Canada, and Canadian government says, no, we are a very fair country, we believe in equality, we belong equality. This is not equality, neither this is any voice that you believe in this. This is a fair case of a terrorism, of a killing, of a mafia or a don, and a gun culture, and you are promoting that, and people sitting there giving a live interviews on national channels. So there is a difference between, when it comes to USA, I must appreciate one thing for US. US will not tolerate even a single kind of a crime case there. There were cases when the dossier was given to USA, those people were handed to the Indian government. I don't believe that after 9/11 USA will ever, even their dreams, wildest dream, would ever support any kind of a terrorist activity. But I do not understand what about Canada. You see what will be the future of this Canada. They will be the same as Pakistan, I must say here. And it is not that things have started worse there in Canada itself. People are killed. Now Justin Trudeau says that this particular person has been killed by the Indian agencies. Okay, tell me, after his statement in the parliament, very next day another gangster was killed there in Canada. Who killed that gangster now? Even he was from India. You never said that this. Now who killed this gangster? Whether your government killed, whether Indian people killed, or your people. The thing is that gangsters are very much in Canada, and they are enemies to each other, and they are killing each other.
No, it's entirely possible, and I think Mr. Sirsa is absolutely right, Terry Miliuski. It's entirely possible that what ultimately cost Nijjar his life were these gang wars, and British Columbia is infamous for these gang wars. But the Prime Minister of Canada chose to inflate a gang war into this diplomatic sort of standoff, perhaps the biggest crisis that India and Canada have faced in their diplomatic relationship in the last 40 years since the bombing of the Air India flights. The point is that either you go public if you have evidence to back those claims, or you try and do it through back channels. Now we have reports that it was the US that provided the initial intel as part of one of the Five Eyes alliance partners. But the US, publicly at least, Mr. Miliuski, has been very, very careful in what it says about this case, saying, Canada is where the alleged crime happened. They are the ones who are investigating. All we are asking India is to cooperate with that probe. They've not said a word condemning or publicly naming and shaming India or Indian government officials. They've been very, very circumspect with their public comments since Trudeau made those allegations.
I agree with you that they have been circumspect, although not to the point of disavowing what Canada is doing. Quite the contrary. They have stepped up and said, we are with Canada on this. We want to see a full investigation. These are serious allegations. And we have cooperated with Canada by supplying intelligence, not perhaps the key intelligence, the smoking gun intelligence that Canada claims to have, but that provides context. At least that's what we're hearing from the current leaks at the White House. But there is what's not being discussed enough, it seems to me, is how do we find a way out of this? And I think both sides, not just the Canadian side, both sides need to get a bit more serious. On the Canadian side, they need to be much more serious about accepting, acknowledging. Listen to what your guests are saying today, acknowledging that Canada has been far too complacent, feeble, weak on this file, and allowing Khalistanis to put up martyr poke. This has been going on for 20 years. It's not just Trudeau, This has been going on for 20 years. They've had pictures of the Air India bomber up as a great martyr at the Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. And now this has all been normalized. We've talked about this before. So Canada needs to be much more hard-headed and serious about realizing that this is a serious threat and that they should be cooperating more with India in getting rid of these people when they cross the line. But India has not got a great record of providing detailed information to Canada that would meet Canadian legal standards. I mean, they make all these charges about Mr. Nijjar. Where are the criminal convictions? Where is the evidence? Where are the extradition requests? India's been basically taking the attitude that Canada, when India says jump, that Canada should say how high. We should just snap to attention and accept what India says. No, you have to provide concrete evidence that will meet our standards. Having said all of that, it seems to me that the first step has to be Canada accepting the Indian point of view that we're going to stop this indulgence. We're not going to be having assassination dioramas parading through the streets of Toronto. We're going to make some laws about the glorification of terrorism. Far too late, but we're going to get it. I think the Canadians could do that, and that would warm up the situation with the Indians.
I said this last week, and I stand by it.
Here, let's talk.
Instead of the float of Indira Gandhi's assassination that was there in Brampton, I think, a few months ago, if there were to be a float of the Twin Towers in New York, and the 9/11 bombers ramming an aircraft into the Twin Towers, would that be acceptable? I mean, all hell would have broken loose, right? All hell would have broken loose if anything of that sort happened anywhere in the civilized world. But Rajiv Dogra, I think, please answer the point that Terry Miliuski is raising. His contention is, yes, NIA has given dossiers, about 18 or 19 of these guys who are in different parts, some in the UK, some in Australia, some in Canada. They are all claiming that the evidence has to be perused by a court of law, and a court of law has to find that evidence convincing enough to convict these people. And short of that, no government will want to extradite citizens of their country, howsoever big the crime they are alleged to have done. Rajiv.
Isn't there an irony in all this? I have full respect for your guests from Canada, but the very fact that they're demanding more and more dossiers reminds one of the demands made by Pakistan. Every time there's an act of terror in India, Pakistan simply keeps on demanding more and more dossiers so as to, make India forget that a crime had taken place on its soil. So similarly, how much of a dossier can any country, including America or Canada itself, provide when the crime has taken place on their soil? India can only provide the elements which led to a murder on its soil, which it did. But it cannot go beyond a certain amount of proof. I mean, you cannot have videograph of a person being killed, which you can send to Canada so that they can see it at its ease.
No, but when they say, Rajiv Dogra, you've been an ambassador. So when they say that they have intercepts of quote-unquote diplomatic chatter involving certain individuals in Indian missions in Canada, does that add up to proof?
No, it does not, because you might be indulging in loose talks. Even diplomats can sometimes talk casually, not about murder, but about things which they should be a little more careful about. So
Okay.
is that proof enough? I mean, just like Canada is saying, give us more proof. Why don't they make those intercepts public? Firstly, is it normal for a civilized country to wiretap another country's diplomats on what is called a foreign soil? After all, embassies are foreign soils in any country,
Okay.
anywhere in the world. But the point I wish to make also is, in context of what you asked, Zaka, is India has been consistent in saying that no proof, no information, no evidence has been given to us of Indian involvement. This morning, media and you yourself have mentioned that there is absolutely no evidence which was given to India either before G20, during G20 or thereafter,
Okay.
or after last Monday. So why does Canada fight shy of saying that, look, these are the papers we gave to India?
Okay. Mr. Sirsa
if-
wanted to
if
make
it
a
is
point,
so
and then
sure.
after that, Professor
Sure.
Ladwig and Professor Karnad. Yeah. Mr. Sirsa.
Sir, I just want to tell you two things. You're talking about the evidence. When Canada says that we have evidence and a chat evidence, if they feel so that a chat evidence is enough to provide, to throw out our diplomat and to say in a parliament that they are killers, then I think more than that evidence is important evidence when some of the citizen of Canadians sitting on their soil says that we have killed this person. I think that is more credible evidence than this evidence, but they do not want to act on that evidence when somebody says, yes, I have made that person killed. So I'm shocked about the Canadian policy. Somebody sitting there is saying that I have killed someone. They say this is not a sufficient evidence to prosecute him and to send him back to India. But
Okay.
this chat is a sufficient. But anyways, second, the most important thing here is I want to remind you about the yesterday incident there in Canada. If you see, the Canadian government, what media was telling, has issued an advisory and issued an order that all those hoardings where Indian diplomats' names and pictures were said and they were threatened to be killed or to be harmed there, they should be immediately removed. Now tell me, what happened suddenly? Why did Canadian government suddenly realized that this is an act of a terrorism and it has to be removed? Why they were silent from last so many days or so many months or so many years? They were not withdrawing it because they knew that we are on a back foot. We have done something wrong. It should not be tolerated, and nobody in this world will tolerate this kind of act of terrorism. So that is the
Okay.
reason they are forced to withdraw it. And now, what more evidence do you want when simply you have such kind of evidence which you yourself are asking your government people to withdraw that and to remove that kind of hoarding?
Professor Ladwig, you know, the problem is Nijjar was killed, I think, in the middle of June. It's been, what, close to 5 months now since that killing happened. Nobody has been charged. There's been no arraignment of any kind. No people have been identified for this crime. And yet the Prime Minister of Canada chose to go in Parliament and publicly make allegations of such a grave nature against a fellow democracy. Surely, if the investigation had reached a stage where they can say with some degree of certainty that yes, there was Indian involvement or Indian agents were involved, that should find resonance in a charge sheet. That should find that should be, you know, put out as a document in a court of law. We don't see any of that. Like I said, not one person has been identified or named for this crime 5 months since it happened.
Well, I think one of the things we have to keep in mind, as the ambassador has already pointed out, the difference between the standard of evidence required for criminal prosecution and the standard of evidence for making judgments in intelligence type cases. It might be the case that as this investigation began to lead, as the Canadians allege, towards some sort of question of involvement by the government of India, that they chose to pursue that. I think I share your puzzlement and frustration at the lack of details or facts that have been released by the Canadian government. One possible supposition is that if an important component of their evidentiary base came from the United States via their Five Eyes partnership, it might not be so easy for the Canadians to sort of reveal or declassify that without the permission of the Americans. We Canadian media has reported that Prime Minister Trudeau raised this issue directly with Prime Minister Modi and that there were no denials. But you would think that there would be more specificity. possibly this is part of the diplomatic wrangling, which is to say that if charge sheets would be produced and if people were actually named, this crisis would potentially go to another level, and perhaps, and this is just supposition on my part, but perhaps one of the reasons why that hasn't happened is because the Canadians are looking for some sort of way to diffuse this.
Okay, what may that way to diffuse be? Because Professor Bharat Karnal, I'll give you the final word. Because when you go public, you are sending out a sign that you are climbing up the escalation ladder. And clearly, the first move in this case was made by Canada. Subsequently, they expelled one diplomat. India matched that tit for tat. And then there were these changes in travel advisories. Again, both countries did that. And then India went ahead and halted visas. Canada so far hasn't, but I suspect if their diplomatic staff are going to be reduced in the mission in Delhi, then that's a backdoor way of saying, okay, we can't issue as many visas. So I think that will also be on the reciprocal basis. But I think the way out generally happens back channel, generally happens when there isn't as much public glare on issues of this kind. That we haven't seen from either side. A move to try and move all of this conversation into the back channels. As far as we know, there's been no back channel communication between India and Canada since Monday last, when these allegations were made public.
Well, look, once Justin Trudeau decided to go public, then it's very hard for either party to then go back to the back channel, and that's a fact of life, because then the issue is already compounded in ways that cannot be then reverted back to where you could have corrected the thing in the first place. But the discussion you are having, I think, begs the question whether assassinations by state, by any state in a foreign country, is something new or unusual. I mean, this is, assassinations have been virtually a norm in diplomatic history and the history of nations. And it's no big deal. And the biggest perpetrators have been actually CIA, MI6 and so on. Raw is merely assuming what everybody's talking about, the Raw's involvement is actually correct, and I doubt very much that that's the case. You would have the perpetrators, the major ones like CIA and MI6 and so on, and the record they have, and how India has suffered, incidentally. Central Intelligence Agency operative killed Homi Bhabha when he put a timed explosive on the Air India flight to Geneva. The aircraft was called Kanchenjunga, and that crashed into Mont Blanc. And of course, the US did that to further its non-proliferation goal. So if you're going to be cold-blooded about things and trying to harm citizens of other countries who are not terrorists, but who need to be done away with to further your foreign policy goals, then you have a problem, do you not? When you bring up something like the Nijjar issue,
at least
who is really a gangster, common criminal and terrorist
was that
rolled into
Nijjar was a branded terrorist. He was wanted in multiple cases. There was an Interpol Red Corner notice against him, and there was no visible attempt by Canada to try and either bring him to justice or even, for that matter, try to extradite him back to India, where he can face the law and face justice for the crimes that he's accused of. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Like I said, there has been seemingly no resolution in sight 1 week since Justin Trudeau made those public and very dramatic allegations. I want to thank all our guests, Mr. Sirsa, Ambassador Dogra, Professor Karnal, Professor Ladwig, and of course, Terry Miliuski for joining us. We'll see how this plays out. Like I said, diplomatically, there is a lot of fire and brimstone going on between Ottawa and New Delhi right now. Perhaps the need of the hour is to try and shift the focus out and take the conversations back channel so that both sides have an opportunity to try and climb off this diplomatic escalation ladder that they've been on for the better part of the last week.